Hello, everyone. My name is Butta B-Rocka. I am an international recording artist and executive film producer. I am thrilled to be here on the Keith Andrew Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Keith Andrew, and welcome to the Keith Andrew Network. The following is brought to you by the Keith Andrew Network, freedom of speech, self-expression, uncensored. You can say anything you want, talk about anything you want. Yeah, I have no cards on my sleeve, and it's also brought to you by Monsters Underneath the Bed. Coming soon to the Keith Andrew Network. First question I want to ask you is icebreakers. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, Keith, thank you so much for having me on your platform. My name is Butta B-Rocka. I am an executive film producer, writer, director. Also, I am an international recording artist.
Absolutely amazing. And I take my hat off to you.
Thank you.
Those are huge accomplishments. Now, first, before we get to those highlights, I want to start off with the icebreakers. So, first one I want to ask you is when you were in college, were you a study nerd or party animal? And what did you major in?
Well, I went to college twice. I got a degree in computer information systems, and then I went back to school and got a degree in marketing and PR. And you said, was I a study?
Study nerd or party animal?
Uh, Actually, I was more of a study nerd than anything. Yeah.
Well, I guess we have that in common. Yeah, I guess because I do wear glasses, so that's automatically stereotype of a nerd. But I do like it's even the audio visual stuff. Back in now I'm dating myself. I'm only 36. Back in the day, when you refer to audio visual stuff, oh, that's what nerds do. But it's funny now. That's what the cool kids do because you get to
Mhm.
create your own show. So I guess it's cool to be a nerd.
Yeah, it's definitely cool to be a nerd. Also with the partying, because I was touring at such a young age singing, in different venues and stuff like that, that was considered to be, my partying stage was I was working, singing. So yeah.
Now, the next one I want to ask you, it's about, well, actually, if I'm looking down, I apologize. I'm looking at your profile because you mentioned this in the beginning. You are an executive film producer. That's absolutely amazing. And let me ask you, you mentioned executive. Can you give us an example of what you mean by that?
Executive meaning I paid all the bills. Did the casting of 32. I have a film out that's currently out right now called Finding the Perfect Guy. From creation to it going on all of the different platforms, I was over everything.
Oh, I am single if you're interested. I try to have fun with everyone because I've been playing with the idea of, because I edit my own show, I create, I book people on the show. So in a way, would you agree that I am my own executive?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're your own executive. Typically, people use the term executive film producer when they are actually shooting films, but you are the executive of Keith Andrews Networks for sure.
I
Just like
appreciate that.
I also have a podcast called Transparency Talks Podcast, and I'm the executive of that as well.
Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Absolutely. I started it in 2020. I really started it as just something to do because I had got injured in 2019, torn meniscus, torn ACL, dislocated my shoulder, which took me off the road from touring, singing for a while. It took me off the road for a year, and I got released in April of 2020 to be able to go back on tour. And I was about to head to Africa, but March of 2020, COVID had happened. And so that sat me down a little bit longer. And so I just started my podcast as something to do. And I was interviewing a lot of my friends that's in the music industry, from national recording artists, international recording artists, and indie artists. So that's initially what happened with my podcast. My podcast ended up getting picked up by 6 stations overseas. I'm in Italy, London, Japan, South Africa, Nigeria. I got picked up in Canada. I'm on Roku. I'm on iHeartRadio, and I got picked up by a station, another station in Atlanta and in Detroit as well. So that's my film. I mean, my podcast. We talk about now. I talk about music and films because also in 2020 I transitioned, since again the world was shut down and I had already injured myself and was off for an entire year recovering. I transitioned into doing films. So I executive wrote, produced, directed, starred in, and put my own music in my very first project called Finding the Perfect Guy.
I mean, shit. I mean, it's uncensored. I have you beat in numbers. Not in that way. I did 1,100. And thanks to you, 28 episodes. But
Wow.
but in return, you beat me hands down because you're also mentioned. You're also streaming, and you're also in other countries where they get to listen to your work as well.
Well, I don't think it's a competition. I think everybody runs their own race, and everybody is, have their own set of goals that they're doing. Because I already was singing overseas in a lot of different countries and everything, I wasn't surprised that those countries, especially the ones that support me a lot, people reached out to me and was like, "Hey, we would like to have your show over here," and stuff like that. It was really cool that it happened, but I wasn't expecting it, but I'm not surprised either.
And I don't, like I said, it's not a competition, but I am really happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
The next one I want to ask you, you also mentioned that you are a recording artist.
Mhm.
Well, first one I want to ask you is who influenced you to become a recording artist? And what attracted you to start your career?
That was easy. So the person that influenced me was seeing Diana Ross as a kid on the television, and I saw her stand on that stage with such grace. And I remember as a kid looking at her, and then they would show highlights of, how the crowd was interacting with her and everything, and seeing the crowd's face and their emotions. People were crying, people were singing along, super happy, and just seeing that in general, I was like, oh, I have to do this. This is what I want to do in my life. And that really was the start of the dream of going after it. It was seeing her. And that was at age 4. By the time I was 12, 13, I had started my own group called NOLT, which meant None Other Like This. I was singing with my cousins. My mom was our manager. We began doing talent shows after talent shows. At first, especially when you're young, we would go to the talent shows and lose, but those were what I call learning curves, because each time we grew from that. We learned about artist development, how to work a crowd, how to use your mics, how to position yourself, and how to be able to read the crowd and bring the crowd into you when you're performing and everything. And so we started doing that, and eventually we started winning. And I really caught that bug of singing. This is what I want to do with my life. And um I really started just going for it at a very young age.
No, absolutely. Hashtag absolutely. I wish I had a dollar for every time I said that. Don't ask me why I say that over the years. Absolutely. It does kind of like a nervous tick,
Hmm.
I guess. But you mentioned working the crowd and hooking the crowd in. Does that fit? not just because we're both performers. Well, obviously, you're a better performer than I am. But would you say that caters to my talk show too? Because I try to hook people in. How do you get people hooked in and dialed in?
Well, I mean, I would do a lot of live performances. Live performances are a little bit different because again, you can see their reactions. You can see if the person, you can see if they're feeling the song. You can see when they close their eyes and you can tell that they're reminiscing or they're singing along with you. That's when you know that you have someone hooked, when they got the smile on their face and the energy is high. When with us having our podcasts, sometimes we can't fully gauge the crowd because there isn't a crowd per se, but we can gauge it based off of when people leave their not remakes, remarks, and when you go live and if people, are putting their comments right then and there, that is a way to tell if someone is really feeling you, you and your show and what you're saying at that moment, that type of stuff. That's how you can gauge it.
No, absolutely. And one thing that I think you approached me or I approached you. I don't know. I'm always looking for talent. I don't even really
I
remember.
don't even remember. It was one of the two. Naturally, me or someone from my team is always pitching me. So that could have been the case, or you might have reached out to me. I actually don't remember.
Well, the reason I bring up is people who I want to have on the show is I make sure they have a big following.
Hmm.
They have 1,000, they have 2,000, whatever. I'm like, okay, interview this person because I know they're supposed, the mother of all, it's uncensored too. You want to keep it uncensored or you don't care?
Yep, it's fine.
The mother of all assumptions is the mother of all fuck ups. And like I said, it's freedom of speech. And I'm just opening up to you. But anyway, but the mother of all of substance is the mother of all screw ups. And when I take pride when if I interview someone, they're like, oh wow, this person was great, and you are great by the way. I'm not kissing your butt. And they're like, oh, you're getting over 100 and 200 views. Then it makes me look like I'm doing a good job because I always
Mhm.
take pride in doing what I'm doing. But when someone who's like, yeah, I'm not getting any views, and it's kind of like, let me ask you something. When you do your podcast, do you ask your guests to share the episode and make sure like, it's a team effort? Because I'm inviting you to be on the show, I expect you to share it with your fans. I'm going to share it with my fans. Or do you agree that it falls on the host's responsibility?
Well, ultimately, it is the host's responsibility. You would hope that all of your guests, you would hope this, you would
Yeah,
hope that they would share the material. Same as when I put out my films or when I do any of my events and stuff, you would hope that the people that are involved would want to share it and you shouldn't even have to say, hey, put this on your page. You would hope that. But ultimately, it is the whoever's, event or whoever's project it is, podcast or whatever, it's generally your responsibility. But yeah, you would like, so this is a way that I typically do things when I'm trying to determine, is this person going to be a person that is going to share what I'm putting out? I'll look on their social media pages. If on their page they don't do any type of promotions outside of just, their own stuff, and you know that they've been on, multiple different people's projects or podcasts and different things, then you know that that's probably not a person that's going to be sharing anything. And it's also possible that they're not the ones that's managing their page.
it's true. But when I invite someone on the show, it's always 50-50. By being on the show, yes, you support people with disabilities, you're supporting me, and I'm giving you airtime. And in return, I expect you to share the episode, say, hey, I was interviewed by this disabled person. And obviously your interview will be shared on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, all social medias. I expect the common courtesy of that person doing the same, because when the interview doesn't get any views, and I probably take this personally, but I do. When an interview doesn't get any views, then I feel like I'm a failure, and I feel like that I'm doing something wrong, and I try to make, change things up. How I see it is, like I said, it's not a catchphrase. I extend my hand to you in friendship. I mean that. It's not a catchphrase. So you're helping me, I'm helping you. But if your video doesn't have any views, then it's kind of like, why did I interview this person? They obviously don't care. And it makes me look bad because this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like, a slap in the face. It's kind of like, what are you doing? Because, do you hate that?
I don't really have that same point of view, as you have. I put the material out there. If you see it, you see it. If you don't, you don't. I keep it moving. I go on to the next show. I don't take it as personal as you do, but there's nothing wrong with that. Um, I just seem to view it a little bit different. Again, as a host myself with my own podcast, you want people to follow you, and you want people to like your stuff and stuff like that. But like you just said, this is your, what number am I?
1,128.
Okay. So typically when you do your very first one, that's the one that you gonna have a million people on there, because you got all your supporters that know you. That's greatest support. It's your very first one, you know what I mean? And as you start, as the numbers start to get, as you start getting to number 10 and you're number 50, they're like, oh my God, I gotta look at it again. Even though it's a different person,
Right,
sometimes people do that, and you're at 1,000 something shows. So I don't know what your viewerships are, but that could be a reason for any of the numbers or some or stuff like that. Same as me, if on my page I'm constantly posting about my event that's coming up, and it's the exact same flyer every time, or only thing I change is just a name or something like that. People's like, oh yeah, I already watched that. I already clicked on that. I already liked the first time. So you have to come up with different ways of promoting your podcast or your events, or whatever you're doing. You got to come up with more creative ways, because if it's the same promotions over and over
right.
again, 9 times out of 10, the viewerships is going to go down.
No, you're right. We're gonna take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, I'm gonna ask you about, COVID and a couple other hard-hitting questions when we come back from this commercial break. The whole point of my talk show is to show people that even with having a learning disability, I can still amount to something. And at the same time, I'm able to turn myself into an example for people out there dealing with any types of learning disabilities and disabilities. Never give up and prove people wrong. Prove to them that labels do not dictate who you are, who you're going to be. So prove to them, still amount to something. KeithAndrewNetWork. Back from the commercial break, it is episode 1128, also known as season 12, number 28. Today it's Friday Night SmackDown. If you're a fan of WWE, make sure to watch SmackDown on Peacock, YouTube, and the Fox 5. Now, the question I want to ask you is, tell us about COVID. How has COVID impacted your life, and do you see things differently?
Oh man, COVID was a wake-up call for everyone. You know, a lot of people lost lives or lost family members or friends, or know someone that's lost someone. So not only was that tough, but it forced people to have to sit down. And for me, as I had mentioned earlier, I actually had to sit down a year prior, 2019, from my knee surgery. So by the time COVID happened, that was now 2 years of me having to sit down, right? And in my industry, in the music industry, even in 2021, clubs and different venues were not hiring anyone because they weren't at full capacity yet. They still weren't running at full capacity. So I technically was out of the industry having to sit down for 3 whole years, right? So with all of this time, all of that time, I had to become creative and say, okay, well, if I can't do music, if I can't go around the world touring and singing and dancing, what else is there? What else can I do? So I wrote a book. My book's called Fear of Failure, Fear of Not Trying. I became an Amazon bestseller in 7 hours. Since then, I've written two additional books, two children's books. Um, my two sons started their magazine called Defying One's Teen Magazine, which I oversee. And we had to learn from, how to do designs, how to find the people. I was already writing for different magazines, and my husband was already writing for different magazines. So we understood the concept of writing, but designing a magazine and running a whole magazine on your own, that was new. And we did that as a family. Um, I wanted to do my own film. And at the time, I was going to do I was going to do web series, but finding out the cost of everything, I wrote 13 episodes and had to condense it down to an actual feature film. So now that was, something that was birthed from having to sit down. So many things were birthed from me tapping into my other strengths and figuring out what my other strengths were.
Absolutely. And stay tuned for the episode. We have a special sit down that's available on TikTok and Instagram when we come back at the end of the episode. But right now, it's the last 7 minutes. I'm going to pass it over to you. Was there anything you wanted to know? Anything you want to talk about? I know you mentioned off the air there were some things you would like to talk about. This is your time. This is your platform.
Absolutely. I appreciate, again, thank you so much for having me on your platform. I do appreciate it. I On top of having my film Finding the Perfect Guy, which is now streaming on 26 platforms, it's on Amazon Prime, Tubi, it's soon to be Peacock, but it's not there yet. It's on Apple TV, it's on Reveal. It got picked up in Africa. I'm in India now. I'm on a lot of different stations. So please make sure that you go and see the film Finding the Perfect Guy. It's a romantic comedy. You will definitely laugh and love it. On top of that, I now have BBR Indie Films. So I did my premiere at Studio Movie Grill, which is a big movie theater here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I booked out the biggest room and premiered my film, in a main theater. And that was something that was very important to me to do, to see myself where all the other films were. And so now I have opened that up to other indie filmmakers. I run a film festival every other month, BBR Indie Films. The next one is going to be on May 15th here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I bring out various people from the film and music industry. I always have someone from music because I'm music first that comes in and they talk to these indie filmmakers about how to get into the industry. I mean, these are pros, that already have major films. I have the vice president of WeTV and All Black coming to the next one. I have a Emmy award winning writer and director that's going to be at the next one. I have a film distribution company. So they're telling you, what to put in your pitch decks, how do you get the funding? How do you get your film placed? Just various things like that. We bring out attorneys to tell you what to have in your contracts, the whole 9 yards. So that's something that I'm very proud of. I do it every other month. So the next one is on May 15th, and then after that will be in July. And you can find all the information at www.bbrmediagroup.com. Once again, that's www.bbrmediagroup.com.
No, absolutely. Now stay tuned. I have a couple questions for you off the air. But
Okay.
wrapping up, it was a real honor and privilege having you as a guest. And how can our fans and listeners get in touch with you?
You can find me on all social media at Butta B-Rocka. That's Butta B as in baby, Rocka. Butter B Rocka.
Absolutely, and all that will be in the description. But stay tuned, we have the special sit down when we come back from this commercial break. But wrapping up our interview segment, it was a real honor and privilege having you as a guest, and I'm looking forward to part 2. Now, in the meantime, if everyone who's watching, you have questions for me, for our guests, and subjects you would like to talk about for next time, leave it below. Our goal is to reach 100 to 1,000 views, so that's our goal. You know, the low, what I call it, the low bow. The lowest is 100. Medium, once you get 500, it's like, okay, now it's moving. And the maximum goal is 1,000. But I bet you have a big following, and my fans would love to hear your story. And with that being said, when we come back to this commercial break, it's the sit down with Keith Andrew.
Show and supporting me, and my message is all that matters.